last video, we talked about how integral allows us to break down the duality of, say, science versus spirituality, in that they are each mapping different domains. In fact, they're mapping one of the most major splits in terms of the perspectives that define our experience, and that is the interiority, the subjectivity on one side, in this case spirituality, and objectivity and material reality on the other, which in this case would be science would be representing that. And so we have that first way of breaking down perspectives. Is it understanding, is it a subjective perspective or is it an objective perspective? Okay, so then within those two perspectives, we also have a further way of splitting it, which is this an individual experience or is it a collective experience? So on the side of subjective experience, we have an individual, so my own personal experience, which is invisible to everybody else, but is very real and very much a part of me. And then we also have the collective interior experience, and that is often called culture or the kind of interpersonal things that are invisible and that we take for granted. All sorts of things go on in our collective experience that very much influence the experience that we are having and yet is invisible. It can be mapped through study. For example, anthropology does a good job of helping us to map those things, but generally, unless you've done that work, it's going to be the rules that are operating or the experience that you're having collectively in a group is going to be subjective and largely invisible. So then on the objective side, we also have an individual and a collective way of mapping that. So an individual level of objective experience would be discrete behaviors or actions or facts or knowledge, basically objective things, but they're discrete, they're on their own. And then when those things interact, just like in the subjective side, my personal experience comes into interact with others in our collective subjective experience. On the objective side, we have a similar thing that happens. So these discrete actions, activities, pieces of knowledge, and so on come together and they start to interact and they build systems and structures. So this would also include things like laws and governmental structures and organizations and other systems that come together that are built of discrete units of objective reality. Examples of this also include things like economics and institutions, ecology, and so on. I'm going to quickly introduce the way we map this in integral so that we can refer back to it later. And so these four quadrants are given the names of I in the individual subjective, we in the collective subjective, it in the individual objective, and then it's a bit funny in terms of the labeling, especially for those English teachers out there, but in the objective collective, it's its. So that is to say a plural of the it, not a possessive its. Another thing that's important to name here is that these things are independent, that my individual subjective experience is independent of the systems in the other side, but they do influence each other. So they do have a relationship, but it's important to remember that there's a limited amount of influence there. So for example, to pick a dramatic example, no matter how hard I meditate, that's an individual subjective quadrant experience, no matter how hard I meditate, I'm not going to be able to change my eye color through meditating. I'm not going to be able to staunch the bleeding if I have a cut through meditating. I may be able to lower my blood pressure, which might help if I am bleeding, and so on. But I can't control the outcome of something in a different quadrant. Okay, why does this matter? Well, it may be obvious at this point, but if we try to solve a problem using only one quadrant, then we aren't fully realizing the potential leverage points we have. So to see depression, for example, as a purely objective experience, neurochemicals and so on, we are going to have limited impact on curing our depression if we don't understand that there is also a subjective experience to that, which might be also ameliorated through things like talk therapy or other practices. Similarly, if we see a societal problem and we try to address it simply by putting in a different system, for example, legislating a new law, and we don't understand that there is also a cultural component to that on the subjective side that is going to be at play, then we risk the culture undermining the potential of the system's change. We need to look at all four quadrants in order to understand the full picture of what is happening, so we can make sure that we are addressing it from all four quadrants. Otherwise, the lack of attention to the other quadrants is going to either slow down or it might even be counterproductive. So in the first video, I introduced the idea of true but partial. And here I'd like to introduce another summary statement, which is and both thinking. So either then, either or, we have a both and mentality that allows us to look at not that one aspect of the solution is the wrong way to go, but rather it is likely a part of the solution. So just to offer a couple of other examples that may help illustrate this idea of needing to look at all four quadrants when we are addressing something. If we think about climate change, then, or the climate crisis, whatever language you want to use there, how can we address that? If we are simply looking at it from the point of view of laws or even infrastructure for things like recycling and green energy and what have you, then we are going to be undermined by lack of attention to other quadrants. So we also need to change people's individual views about the environment and their own relationship with it. We need to educate people in the upper right quadrant, the IT quadrant, give people the information that they need, the data that helps them to understand both what is happening and how their behavior impacts it. And then huge one here is we have to shift the culture. So we need cultural forces where we collectively embrace certain behaviors and mentalities, and that we also address the norms that people expect of each other. So in the next video, we'll explore how these quadrants develop over time in individuals, in cultures, and in the world more broadly.